Good evening, friends. Namaskar, Vanakkam, Namaste, Sat Sri Akal, Adab, Bonjour, Hola. Wherever you're tuning from, welcome back to Career Shifts podcast. We are on the journey to the future. Thank you again for the love that you've shown to this series. Your reflections, comments, quiet messages, they're all reminders that this isn't just a podcast. It's a space for honest conversations, for questioning what we take for granted, and for imagining what a better future could look like. Today, we are just going to do that. We're talking about power, we're talking about systems and the policies that shape our everyday lives. Public policy often feels distant, something only bureaucrats or politicians worry about. But look around. Why does your city struggle with basic infrastructure? Why some apps or platforms get banned overnight? Why do schools still teach the world when it has already moved on from? Why do some startups soar while others get stuck, despite doing everything right? These aren't random problems, these are policy outcomes. And yet, so few of us understand how these decisions are made or how much they shape our lives quietly and powerfully. To help us unpack this, I'm speaking to someone who I know really well since 2021, Sharat Chander, an incredible human being, someone who carries deep wisdom without ever making it about himself. He's worked inside the PMO, Election Commission, and across industries like mobility, edtech, and big tech. And he carries stories, some of them sharp, some of them deeply moving, that stay with you long after the conversations. What you will take away from this conversation today will be why public policy isn't an abstract, it's deeply personal, how decisions that affect millions are often made in quiet rooms, what it means to work across government, industry, and hold on to your values, and why we must pay attention not to what's just broken, but also what needs rebuilding. This isn't about politics, it is about people. It is about understanding the rules of the game so we can change them when they are no longer relevant or no longer serve us. If you have ever wondered why systems like this don't work, or it's working for few but not for most, this is a conversation for you. So let's dive in. Episode 3 of Journey to the Future. Welcome, Sharat. How are you doing?
Thank you and good evening. Namaste to everyone tuned in. I'm doing very well, Gopal, and thank you for having me on the show today.
Wonderful. Before we start, do you have any opening thoughts, comments that you want to share with the people listening in or watching live?
Well, welcome to this show, and I hope that the next hour or so adds value uh, to whatever it is that you do or whatever it is that you're interested in. And I'll try to be as candid as can be on the subject, and hopefully we can talk a little bit about policy and what it means for us in our day-to-day lives.
Wonderful. So, Sharat, you've had a very interesting career. Um, Pretty much goes to the theme of this podcast as well, which is career shifts. You started off in a particular. I mean, why don't you walk us through what your journey has been? I think it would be interesting to hear from you about how that has happened and what you do now.
Sure. So after my schooling, and I grew up in a small town in northern India called Roorkee, which is famous for what was then its university and is now IIT Roorkee. I actually grew up on the campus, and I started off doing architecture. So I studied Bachelor's of Architecture from IIT Roorkee itself. Went on to do a master's in architecture, and at that point, I thought I would have a career in architecture. And I specialized in my master's in building engineering and management. And I thought that
Wow.
I would do well as a project manager. And then, after having given 6 to 7 years of my life studying architecture, and then a few months actually practicing some elements of it, I did think of doing something that was going to be slightly more impactful with my life. And that's when I decided that, like many young people across India in the mid 90s, I thought maybe I should give a shot at the civil services. So slightly late in life. Most people have this career option mapped out in their teens or their late teens. And I
Correct.
was virtually in my early to mid 20s when I first thought of this, but never too late to start. So, with that background and with some intent, while I worked as an architect in various places, including in Delhi Development Authority, I managed to get into the civil services in 1999, so the batch of 99, and through a combination of rank and choice, I was chosen for the Indian Information Service, which has to do with being spokespersons for the government of India and managing the official media units, which are Doordarshan, All India Radio, for instance. And then began the career in the civil services. Started off with a couple of years in what was then the Directorate of Advertising and Visual Publicity, which was about government campaigns. And in 2003, the government decided that Doordarshan should have an own independent 24-hour news channel. And then I was chosen as one of the founding editors for this news channel. And this was, I guess, November 2003. Those were the heydays of television news. We had a new news channel opening every few months. And the debate was whether print would survive or whether TV would take over everything. And everyone from policymakers to people on the street felt that TV news was the medium to be and the medium of the future. And everyone was glued on to television news. It was a big game of TRP and so on. And there was Doordarshan News trying to be the public broadcaster, of course, being the public broadcaster, of course, actually. And at the same time, trying to make sure that it wasn't getting left behind in the race for news and in the race for informing people about developments. So I did every aspect of TV news over the next 3-4 years. And I got a lot of opportunity to do that. And then I suddenly said, maybe I should make my way in the world of the business of media. And then I thought, if I do that, I need to actually train myself a bit more because I'm not really trained in business. So I thought I'd take a break for a while, leave my work, leave without pay, and actually go into an MBA. So I appeared for the CAT exam, as it is, the combined admission test for IIMs in those days. And in 2008, I joined IIM Lucknow as a student once again, back to college after 12 years. And so that was interesting. And it kept getting better and better as my time in IIM Lucknow progressed. And I learned a lot. It was a very good time of life, even though I was in my mid-30s. But it was good to be back in college and be a student all over again. And that time that I could actually have left government service and taken up a corporate offer. But the slight twist was that at that point I decided maybe I need to work a bit more in government now. So I came back to government. And then I spent the next few years working in Doordarshan News again, and then in Press Information Bureau, where I got transferred, where we work as spokespersons really for the government of India. And then in 2014, when there was a new government at the center, by combination of luck and where I was at that time, I was in the right place. It was the right time. Somehow or the other, I just got picked up by the Prime Minister's office. And thereafter, for the next 5 years, I handled official communication for the Prime Minister of India. I was part of that. And that was a time of great change because TV news was suddenly stagnating and digital media was coming up in a big way. Social media had already arrived. So it was very, very interesting in reimagining communication from the government perspective in this era of the digital takeover. And that done, I had completed 20 years in government service by 2019 when the first term was over. And I felt it's a good time. You can actually, in the time that I joined government, there was a provision that, after 2 decades, you can actually leave government with certain benefits. And I thought maybe now it's a good time to venture into the corporate world. Eventually, of course, COVID arrived before make the switch. And in the interim, I was posted to the Election Commission. And then in the Election Commission, we actually reimagined the way communication would happen in the COVID era in the run-up to the preparation for the Bihar election of 2020, which was to be the first election post-COVID. And by the time that got done, I had an opening in the corporate world. And therefore, I quit government and I moved on to a corporate career. I started off with Uber, solving problems in urban mobility. moved on after a while to Coursera, which, as many of our viewers would know, is a higher education tech platform. And then for the last 2 years or so, I've been with Samsung. So that has been my corporate journey. And what did I do in my corporate life? I basically picked up all the learnings that I had from 2 decades of government service and tried to apply it to policy and government-related matters in these corporate entities, and some advocacy as well, trying to solve problems for them. So that's what the journey has been about.
Wonderful. So, viewers listening in, watching, please do share any questions. Tell us which city you're joining us from, watching this show from. Drop in any questions that you have on the chat. I'll pick them up as the show progresses, and you have the opportunity to ask Sharat any questions that are in your mind about public policy, careers in public policy, or anything that would be an interesting one for Sharat to answer. That said, Sharat, as while people share their thoughts, you and I met at IIM Ahmedabad, and I think it's interesting. I was setting up the School of Public Policy there, and you were also somewhere involved in the whole process of doing that. When I took over that role, for me, public policy was almost an unknown word. I learned a lot through the journey before I started the journey, and through the journey as well. But often, a lot of people listening in, watching later now, may not really fully understand what public policy is. If we can spend a little bit time on, demystifying this entire term, and how does it even affect all of us without us even being aware about that? I think that would be really beneficial for the audience.
Right. I think that's a very interesting question, Gopal. So let's dive in, and maybe let me give you an illustration.
Sure.
So let's imagine that there is a young mother in one of the big cities of India, and it could be anyone. And now the young mother, of course, is balancing responsibilities at home, but also is looking for a career. And then in her career, she wants choices. She wants to maybe work for another organization. And at some point, she may want to have her own organization. She may want to turn entrepreneurial. She may want to be an entrepreneur. And in each of those cases, in an ideal world, the road should be open for her.
Yeah.
Now, let's imagine that she's taken up for the time being a role in a different organization. And for this, she has to travel to work. And her place of work is, let's say, 6 kilometers or 8 kilometers away. And today she wants to travel by public transport. Should be possible.
Yep.
Take the metro, take a bus, take an auto, take a cab. Tomorrow she wants to drive down. So there should be a safe access. She should feel safe driving on the road.
Correct.
Day after tomorrow, she feels that the weather is very good and she needs some exercise. So she wants to walk down to work, even if it takes an hour or 90 minutes. She should be able to do that. The next day, there's more work in office, so she has to stay till late. She has to stay till 10 or 11 p.m. And she's willing to do that. But then she wants to be safe. She wants to feel safe coming back home at night. Now, all of these situations, Gopal, the freedom to choose careers, the ability to be able to be an entrepreneur in a chosen field if you want to be, the provision of safe, affordable, reliable public transport, safe roads to drive on where people follow traffic rules, a safe walking environment. One day she may want to cycle to work, the ability to do that, and the confidence to be able to return home late if one is working late. All of these things are where public policy touches the lives of people. These are all instances where if these things are provided, public policy is working well. Or vice versa, put the other way around, good public policy would ensure these outcomes. So therefore, every step of the way, in every endeavor, in every human endeavor, there is policy which is touching our lives. So we cannot ignore it. Sometimes we tend to ignore it, or sometimes we tend to assign one abstract, amorphous identity to it called government. But actually, we can break it down into a set of actions or a set of frameworks, which can be described collectively as public policy. But in the illustration that I gave, it could be ease of doing business, it could be safe, it could be public transport, it could be urban mobility, it could be policing, it could be law and order, so on and so forth. So all of these policies made by different departments at different levels of government, at the central level, at the state level, at the local level, all of these are at play. And
Yeah.
when they come together in harmony, is when you have the best outcomes, and you have given this young mother the freedom of choice. So, Gopal, to sum it up, good public policy or public policy is all about choices. It's about giving freedom at scale in India to a billion plus people, as opposed to a lot of freedom to just a few. It is for providing freedom at scale and reasonable freedoms at scale to everyone. That's the essence of good public policy.
I don't think anyone could have said better than that, in terms of how public policy does affect each one of our lives in different forms, than what we can imagine. Now, but if you really look at the amount of awareness of, firstly, a lot of what is written, a lot of what is available in the public domain about public policy is not accessible. And when I say not accessible, either the terms are too technical, or written in language or spoken in language that probably may be not well understood by a lot of people. The fact that we are doing this podcast in English and not in Hindi also means that a lot of people will not listen to it, unfortunately, but that's a format, can't really do much about it. But the fact is that a lot of information is not easily accessible to people about what public policy means. For such people, what is the starting point? Where should they go about understanding some of these in details? Because I think at the end of the day, awareness is going to be very important. And are we making people enough aware? And the reason why we are on the show and you're the guest is also to do that bit a little better. So, any thoughts on that? Like, where should people start when they are in the journey of knowing more about public policy?
So, I guess for most people, at a practical level, the awareness of public policy will come from reading about decisions taken by government from sources from news sources, essentially. And I think the only guardrail that I would like to add there is that very often in the hurly burly of life, we have our own one or two sources of news, and that's all we assign to it. And it gets worse also because these days algorithms decide everything. So we don't have a single source
Yeah,
except the source that our feeds on our mobile phones
yeah,
provide us,
yeah.
and those are algorithm driven. So if you see one kind of content, it shows you more of that. And
Correct.
I guess in this journey of becoming familiar with policy, for most people, the only guardrail that I would put in place is that if you really want to know about policy, read multiple sources.
Hmm.
You know, just you don't need to read entire publications. I'm not asking you
Hmm.
to read entire newspapers, for instance, or every page.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
pages or the news articles that concern policy should be looked at from various perspectives. What that'll help people do is to understand where the balance lies, because unfortunately, very often, if you read one news, you tend to get one slant of it. So
Correct.
that's the first level. The second level, for people who tend to get interested, or who really feel that, maybe we need to deep dive, and maybe we are aware and concerned citizens, or maybe we are citizens who want to make a difference, then you could go one level deeper. And there I'd suggest that, if you really feel interested about some policy, announcement, or if you really feel concerned about some policy announcement from what you've read about it, it would make a lot of sense to find the original source. Because what
Mm,
you read in a news article is maybe 5% of everything or 10% of everything. Maybe not even that, maybe less some cases. And very often we tend to miss the woods for the trees.
mm,
So over a period of time, if people are really concerned or really want to become, aware, concerned citizens who want to make a difference, then the first step in that journey, before you go to the next steps, which we might talk about later on. But before you do that, I think it is important to read about policy from unfiltered sources, which will basically mean digging out the original press releases at the bare minimum, at the bare minimum. And then if you get more interested or you feel that there's a disconnect between what you're reading here in the press release and what you see in the news article, then actually go to the Gazette notification. So read the
mm,
actual notification, read the language. These are not written in legalese. Very often, they're plain simple English.
mm.
Uh, and therefore, read the relevant sections. And once you've read a couple, maybe you'll find it easier to read a few more. So get to know what the policy actually is from the source. And then you'll be able to discern what parts of the noise around it are actually true and what are not true. And then maybe you can become this aware, informed, and concerned citizen, and then plan your next course of action, if any.
Got it. No, I think this is a very valid and a relevant advice. But again, a little deeper on that part is the media has a role to play in this as well, to be able to disseminate the details of what is written in the gazetted notification, which predominantly is either in Hindi or English, if I'm not wrong, into a language which is more easily accessible to people at large. Um, in absence of that, I'm guessing, because you also said that there could be 5 to 10% or less at times, depending on how the news is done. Um, are there other sources available for local language that can be utilized? Or is this then again, as people say, all the YouTubers who would end up coming up with their own versions of it?
Yeah, one of the things that I do believe in is that if we're really concerned aware citizens, we should go to the original sources
Mm,
before we make up our minds, especially in cases where we feel there's something concerning or something we need to be
mm,
worried about or something which doesn't seem what it should be. So I would always think that one should look for the original unfiltered sources before one makes up one's mind. So I'd reiterate
sure.
that point. But then that might be rare. So I want to take a step back and I want to reiterate what I said in the first part of my earlier answer, which is that for most people, on most occasions, it would be sufficient if one just looks at government news from multiple
Mm,
publications, not just one source, but multiple sources. That, I guess, would provide a reasonable balance and a more holistic view for most people at most times. And that's a good way or a good point of departure in this journey to really know about what government is doing. And, as I said, for most people at most times, I would leave it right there. But
got
to
it.
answer your question specifically, state level notifications are always there in the state language as well. Those
Mm,
are always there,
mm, mm.
and
Got
English
it.
is always there. Yeah.
Always there. So, Sharat, we'll go back to you. From the government to now in the corporate world, I'm sure there was a lot of difference in the way things worked. And it required you to kind of internalize a lot of change. So, mainly from a mindset perspective. Um, Walk us through that journey. How easy was it? How hard was it? At what point of time did you face the imposter syndrome, or did you face it at all? And how did you overcome that?
Yeah, you can see, Gopal, that I'm all smiles. I'm all smiles. And the reason for that is I'm going to surprise you here. And I'm going to give you a rather crisp answer and one which you might not expect. So let's see. Uh, what did I have to unlearn, for instance? I guess that's a part of your question. What did I have to
Yeah.
learn and what did I have to unlearn? So let's begin with what I had to unlearn. So Gopal, interestingly enough, and I say this in full consciousness, the biggest belief that I had to unlearn when I began the corporate journey was the belief that procedures and processes are simpler on the corporate side. And trust me, it didn't take me long to unlearn that one. It didn't take me long. On the new muscle, on the new muscle that I had to build, the new skills I had to pick up. Again, on a lighter note, on a strictly lighter note, one of the corporate orgs that I worked for gave me a brand new MacBook on day one.
Wow.
And the transition from Windows to Mac was tricky for me in the first week. And that's about the one thing that I can recall. But on a more serious note, Gopal, I believe I had a great advantage coming from the government. I found that I understood the intent behind government policy intrinsically, even in sectors I had never worked for earlier. For instance, mobility or online education. I've not worked in these sectors in my career. Very often I found, that pathways exist within the depths of policies and rules and gazette notifications. What is required from my perspective, working for a corporate entity, is to align the working with the rules as they exist. And once that has been achieved, if there is still a gap, then the role of advocacy begins. So I'd never done advocacy before, but it almost came naturally to me because my advocacy was usually rooted in existing policy. So that was a huge advantage I had. And therefore, the short and crisp answer to your question is very little on either side. Relatively little to unlearn and relatively little to learn, but new ways of application.
Yeah. No, one thing I've really appreciated the fact with people in the government services, at least, is the fact that they are always on the move. I think the transitions happen every 3 years, if not less, because of the way the nature of work is. And I'm sure that plays a huge role in the way you are able to adapt to newer roles as well, which I think often a lot of people on the side of the world, which is the corporate world, don't really empathize with. They feel that the entity is aware and should know more, but at the end of the day, the person sitting on the other side will be as new to the topic as you are. Which brings me to a very interesting question that I have for you, which is, with all that is happening in the world of AI, if we were to really focus on that, AI is reshaping the way we do things, be it in mobility, be it in tech roles that you're playing in, but in general as well. Like, AI has kind of reshaped a lot of what we are doing things today. As a nation, do you see us already ready for it, or there is a lot of catching up to do?
Yeah, I think technology is bringing us, and in fact, some other imperatives also are bringing us to a stage where a lot of policy cannot be made by one country or one country's government alone. So there are domains of this sort, so AI is one such domain. Cryptocurrency is another such domain. The threats of terrorism and climate change are some others. There are times when, in each of these cases, it's not enough for one country to make rules, because these technologies or these processes, the way they are, do not lend themselves to country borders and have very strange ways of making their way through past borders. And therefore, a lot of this process with regard to AI, which you specifically asked me for, will happen through global dialogue, through multilateral fora like the G20, where India is a prominent player. Having said that, We could look at one or two potential outcomes. One potential outcome is AI would cause a lot of disruption in a lot of fields and a lot
Mm.
of ways of doing things. Um, well, if there's one thing that I'm confident of now, after 2 decades in the government and some more years working with government, it is the in the ability of governments across India to handle disruption. This is actually something that officers are trained to do in various scenarios.
Mm.
And I can give you the example of when COVID struck. Well, COVID was as big a disruptor as any. But the
Yeah.
way the concerned departments came together, the way the Home Ministry came up with a master notification that empowered states, the way the
Mm.
states responded, the way, and without exception, and the way various departments came together to identify capacity constraints and then work with industry and other stakeholders to quickly overcome them.
Mm.
Officers at all levels in the government of India, for instance, were the first ones to return to office. I don't think this is something that is really appreciated by many, but I remember, for instance, that I remember going to office in the Election Commission in April 2020
Mm.
because plans for
Wow.
the upcoming Bihar state election had to be entirely
Mm.
reworked from the drawing board. So, of course, while COVID was at a personal level still a disaster for so many people, there's no denying that. But so many of the officers who ventured out to work actually risked their lives too. And dozens of them unfortunately contracted COVID and passed away, leaving young families behind. So they were no less
Mm.
than COVID warriors also. So therefore, this ability in the government of India and in state governments across India to come together and face disruption and overcome it is something I have immense faith in. Now, apart from that, apart from the fact that it's going to disrupt a number of industries and it's going to disrupt a number of other fields, AI is a bit of an what I call an unknown unknown. There are the known unknowns. So, like what you don't know, and then
Mm.
there are the unknown unknowns in policy, which means you don't even know what you don't know. There may be dimensions that you entirely cannot imagine. So we don't know what we don't know when it comes to AI. So, as I said, it calls for multilateral cooperation. It calls for heightened vigilance with regard to defense, with regard to internal security, with regard to election integrity, and in many other domains. But in each of these cases, on the balance, I feel that the government is well aware and taking steps. So, we need to wait and watch, but I remain cautiously optimistic. And
Mm.
also, the one more thing I wanted to add here is that we need also to be prepared to change our ways of working
Mm.
at the individual, at the family, and at the organizational level. Because the more we make those changes internally, the easier it will be for governments to navigate through whatever unknown unknowns come our way. So, obviously, a more aware population, a more aware people about disruptions and risks associated with AI make it easier for the government to navigate it. But having said that, I have full faith in the ability of governments across India. And I think I want to leave it there for now.
Sure, sure. Really appreciate you sharing that perspective, and I agree. I mean, I think, I was part of the institution which is more or less, in many ways, completely influenced by how government functions, and I completely agree. I think when it comes to coming together, I think no one had any doubts, and agree with you on that part. The other part that I wanted to understand, and this probably would be of help and value to a lot of people who would be listening, maybe students or even general and otherwise. If you were to take this example of taking AI from a public policy lens perspective, um, now there is a way a policy is formulated. And now you already mentioned that there is a need for a more global, multilateral approach to policy making in this when it comes to AI. But in general, how does the world of policy making work? Like, what are some of the aspects that are considered when the policy is being made? Is it only public interest? Is it data? Is it what? Like, how does it go? I mean, how does one go about making a policy?
Okay, so that's interesting. So let's look at the things you mentioned. The first being public interest. Yes, of course, but that's an esoteric term. So I guess beyond saying yes, what do you say? Yes, every government believes that whatever action it is taking or whatever policy it is making is doing so. It's doing so in public interest. Let's look at data. So yes,
Mm.
data is important, but more often than not, data is available. So more
Mm.
often than not, data is not a challenge. What else? So let's talk about politics, for instance. Many people ask this question. So is making policy or is policy making about politics? Well, policy and politics cannot go very far independently of each other. But even that is not the difficult part because documents exist where one can gauge the
Mm.
broad direction of policy, and that's also fairly well understood. And then there's this little bit of thing that people say, is it instinct? So well, instinct rarely drives decision making per se, but
Mm.
instinct may drive the timing of implementation of a new policy. So when should a new policy
Sure.
be introduced? When is it time to introduce reforms in a particular sector? That may be a little bit about instinct. So to that extent, maybe yes. But these are things that normally get discussed and people speculate on these things. And okay, we've looked at them,
Yeah.
but I want to go deeper here, if you'll allow
Mm.
me, because I
Sure.
want to also add a few elements here that really contribute to policy making in India, which are perhaps not appreciated enough.
Mm.
The first one that I want to mention is, and I say this with all emphasis, the first one is diversity. India is remarkably diverse, as we all know. And today there
Mm.
is a deep understanding in the government that one size does not fit all. So policies, when made, have to be flexible enough to accommodate the enormous diversity of India.
Mm.
Or, of course, they could be built on such broad based principles that they cater to various scenarios. So that's one. The diversity of India is something that the governments do keep in mind when they make policy, and a lot of the fine tuning, a lot of the nuances built into policy to accommodate diversity.
Mm.
The second, and I don't know if people really realize this, but the second thing to consider is administrative and capacity constraints. So in Delhi, a ministry might want to work really fast. Let's say houses have to be, the housing for all is an objective. So build houses in 1 year. We'll build houses for all in 1 year. The government might actually find the resources for that. Let's assume that the union
Mm.
government may say, "Okay, whatever it takes, we'll give all the money." But what would happen? Because houses aren't going to be built just in Delhi. Houses are going to be built in nearly 800 districts across India. So do the states have the capacity to disburse that amount of money to the districts and then keep track
Mm.
of the, do the districts have the capacity to productively spend that amount of money in a year?
Mm.
Is land available for at once for all those houses? Are there enough masons and carpenters, enough skilled workers available in all those districts? Is there enough building material available to do all this in 1 year in all of those districts? So a lot of policy making, Gopal, is about reconciling the ambition to make rapid progress with the realism of constraints, administrative constraints and capacity constraints. So I think that's a great appreciation that needs to come in. And the last thing that I want to mention is that policymaking at many times is also about lateral thinking. So,
Mm.
amid the remarkable diversity of India, imagine various scenarios. So, what will happen if the rains fail? What will happen
Mm.
if monsoon is abundant this year and causes floods? How will it impact this proposed policy? What will happen
Mm.
if there's a major cyclone on the East Coast? What will happen if there's a sudden situation on the borders or in the high seas that calls for rapid deployment of additional resources, let's say? What will happen if the pandemic resurfaces? So, proposed policy needs to be tested against many such scenarios. So, you do scenario building. And the robustness that it will have in such scenarios is to be ensured before it can pass muster. And this deliberation happens through stakeholder consultations, and it happens through deliberations within verticals and then across verticals and then at the apex level in cabinet and so on, or maybe in interministerial groups and then in cabinet. And that's just the executive part of it. Thereafter, the legislature has a chance to discuss it, maybe take it to a standing committee or a select committee, and so on and so forth.
No, I really appreciate you, walking us through this entire part of how a policy is made. And interestingly, I was having a coffee chat with a former civil servant who then went on to become um, an HR guru for a lot of us, Prabir Jha. And we were talking about people, and we were talking about people from a perspective of what is India going to look like in the next 5 years. And he exactly mentioned what you were sharing in your aspect of, you know, execution and capacity. Like, are there enough masons? Are there enough carpenters? Are there enough architects? Are there enough, etc., etc., etc.? Unfortunately, that is where the policy rubber doesn't hit the road, right? In terms of a very well designed policy, if it doesn't get executed well enough, you have this gap, and we often see that enormously around us, right? I mean, I think it may be a fantastically drafted policy, but it doesn't really work well for people, and it doesn't affect lives. Where do you see the gap? Like, what is causing the gap between the policy in its essence and its execution ability? Is it lack of will, public will, um, or could corporates and people in general do something differently? What can be done to bridge this gap?
I think there's a lot that's being done already, and what might be needed among various stakeholders is more rigor in these processes.
Hmm.
So any important policy goes through layers of stakeholder consultations,
Hmm.
and these are times when the government actually invites various stakeholders to comment on drafts. So there are
Hmm.
drafts that are put out in the public domain, and then people get a chance, or other
Sure.
interested parties get a chance. And you've seen this working in some cases. For instance, look at the data protection rules. The Digital Personal Data Protection Act. It's called DPDP
Yeah.
Act, and I think that bill went through several iterations because they put an
Yeah.
iteration out in the public domain. There was feedback from stakeholders. They took it back. They brought it out again, incorporating some of the feedback. There was again intense feedback. It again went back, and it went back and forth. And then maybe sometime in 2023, it was passed by Parliament. It's still not implemented. Why? Because the
Yes.
rules are being framed. And the
Hmm.
rules, the act is there. Now, based on the act, there are rules. And the rules are going to decide the execution and the implementation. But even for the
Correct.
rules, the government has gone through a very, very elaborate stakeholder consultation process. So, ministers, secretaries have come down, listened to the stakeholders, and then a big stakeholder in this case is big tech. So it's an example I'm familiar with. And
Yeah.
so they've listened to various tech entities, various people, lawyers, activists, other people who are interested in the policy, looked at various aspects of it, and they've gone back, incorporated the feedback, brought out fresh drafts, consulted on those fresh drafts, taken it back again, and maybe very soon it'll finally be implemented. So therefore, a policy does go through layers of stakeholder consultations and layers of iterations at various stages before it finally reaches implementation stage. Why then are there so many instances where policy does not seem to have the desired impact? I guess one of the reasons that one could hypothesize, especially when it comes to civic policy making, policy making that affects
Hmm.
people,
Yeah.
it is that while big entities, so big corporations, do have policy muscle in house to build advocacy, to be able to make their voice heard in stakeholder consultations. Very often, you have on the ground when it comes to people, you have this bunch of or this large numbers of armchair activists, people who are very happy
Hmm.
pontificating on WhatsApp. This is the way things should be. This is
Yeah.
this is what is wrong, and so
Yeah.
for everything from cricket to policy,
Yeah.
there are a
And
million opinions.
politics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and really, what I feel is that the key here is if some of those, a tiny fraction of those citizens could actually go a step further. And then, something that I hear again or something that I see again, and I'm slightly skeptical about that as well, is, the next thing is signature campaigns. So petitions, and then collecting signatures. And there's basically one sentence that we want this to happen, and then signature campaign, and then you publish the signature campaign and you make a lot of noise around it, and then you say, oh, the government isn't listening to us. I guess as students of this field of policy, one must try to appreciate what's happening here. So, collecting signatures or giving a point of view is the easiest thing. That's basically skimming the surface, right? So, do we have time? Maybe I'll give you an illustration.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's say there are traffic woes in Bengaluru. Yeah. And let's say that people have a million ideas of what possible solution should be, right?
Correct.
And for instance, someone says, why isn't remote work mandated for all time to come? The IT sector, at least, we don't need to go to work. We're as productive sitting at home.
Yeah.
And there'll be a lot of strife around that. And why doesn't the state government just mandate remote work for at least the IT sector?
For everybody.
People saying that. I hear a bit of that actually.
Yeah.
And then what I always feel is that the organizations, the big IT companies have taken a considered view over a period of time that it's probably better to return to work physically. And I would respect that, because ultimately, respect the management decision, and maybe let's go for that. So let's for a moment say that it's a call taken.
Yeah,
we live with that. Let's say that maybe they've taken everything on board, and then let's take this hypothetical scenario. But how about staggering office timings? How about staggering office timings by an hour? So let's say that the IT sector goes to work an hour earlier and then leaves work an hour earlier. Will that have an impact? And suddenly, people may get very excited about this. So there'll be, let's say, this group of 3 or 4 people who has this idea one Sunday afternoon over a cup of coffee. And then what do? They write this on their WhatsApp groups.
Yeah.
And then they take out a petition and they collect signatures and then they publish it and they make some noise about it. And then they hope that the government will act on it. And what? Nothing happens.
Nothing happens.
Why does nothing happen? Why does nothing happen? Nothing happens because now I put on my policy hat. And if I am the person in charge of this and I see those signature campaigns, I actually am thinking of the entire population of Bengaluru. I'm thinking of 10 million people, let's say, or 8 million people. And I want solutions that work for 8 to 10 million people.
Everybody, yeah.
Yeah, solutions that work for everyone. And I'm not convinced. Because I'm skeptical and because I'm risk averse, as policymakers are apt to be, and because I want to make sure that I'm taking all concerns on board, I'm not convinced that this group of some people in the IT sector is actually offering a solution that will make a difference at scale. And I want solutions at scale. And really, what are the next steps? What is the evidence? So on and so forth. And then I may have a million other things on my plate. So this will just tend to lie, right? And then get marked down from level to level to level to level, and then it'll sit somewhere in some file somewhere. But instead, let me give you an alternative hypothesis. What could be done that might make a difference? Yeah. So I'll spend 3 or 4 minutes on this, if you'll allow me.
Sure.
So let's say the same set of 3 or 4 people then put on their thinking hats and they say, let's go beyond signature campaigns because they're not working. So the first question, and these are guys from the IT world, so they're fairly well aware and they know the process that works when they're writing code, for instance, or looking at or examining code or solutioning for problems. So one of the first things that you look for is evidence. So you say, okay, at the moment we have only a hypothesis. We have a hypothesis that if the IT sector goes to work an hour earlier and leaves an hour earlier, it might solve traffic woes. Let's test the hypothesis. So can you test the hypothesis? So are there 5 examples of comparable cities around the world where this has worked? That would be good evidence. If not, then go to your Excel spreadsheets, look at some data, hypothesize, simulate use your program, simulate, see what the traffic volumes are, see whatever data is available, calculate the difference and build a case. And then if you see, okay, this seems like good evidence now, there are 1 or 2 case studies I can see some limited data, it seems to be making sense. You don't stop there. Then you float this idea, okay, so let's say these 4 friends are between 3 different big IT firms. So they go to their respective IT firms and they start floating the idea among their peers. And then you apply the 80-20 rule, say, because I think that's a kind of threshold. If you find 80% of people seem to be somewhat convinced that this might work, that's when you take it to your management and you say, maybe this is a good idea, and maybe a lot of people seem to be good with it. So maybe in consultation with HR, if you feel this is a good idea, let's do this. So how do you do this? You actually say that, okay, let's go to, say, an industry body like a CII, the local chapter of the CII, say, let's all come together. Then you call all the IT sector, not just these 4 companies, but everyone. And then you say, look, maybe the IT sector will be better off because it works on these 2 or 3 locations and the people are usually coming from these 4 or 5 areas. So maybe it'll work better if there's an hour's lag, or we start an hour early and end an hour early. Maybe that'll help us. And then everyone broadly by the 80-20 rule or 90-10 rule says, yeah, maybe let's give it a shot for 6 months. And then you go ahead and you prepare to implement it. And then before implementing it, you do just one thing. You ask CII, the local branch, to send a letter to the industries minister or the IT minister, as might be, to the state IT minister, fix up an appointment, which will easily be granted because they listen to industry bodies. So go for 30 minutes. And you say that you're presenting a solution. You're not coming with an issue. You're presenting a solution. And you're saying that the IT companies in Bangalore are volunteering to do this. And our evidence says, our data suggests that this is going to impact by this much. And all you have to do is nothing. You don't have to take out a gazette notification, nothing, but just come out, give some bites in the media, encourage us, say this looks good. And if this works, then we might consider it for other sectors as well. And with that, go ahead and implement it. And if it works, then after 6 months, the government might say, oh, this is working. Let's do this for 10 government departments as well. And then, some other sectors may say, let's do it for us as well. And then, some other cities may say, oh, this has worked well in Bangalore. Let's do this in Chennai. Let's do this in Kolkata. Let's do this in Delhi. Let's do this in Mumbai. And you bring about real change. And the last word, what about those 3 or 4 people who came up with this idea? Do they get recognition? No. Do people know their names? No. And Gopal, the takeaway is that, there are countless such faceless, nameless officers in governments at the central level, at the state level, who brought about such change diligently. And then they quietly moved on to the next postings, and they quietly ended their careers, and they quietly faded away. And no one knows their names, but what they did, the work they did, impacted millions positively. So let's be some of them.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, as I was listening to this, I'm sure whoever is listening to this as well would have great amount of empathy for the whole process of making policy. What seems like a very simple written document getting passed lays on tables for several years because the rules are still getting formed. But even after that, things don't get done. And the reason, what Sharat beautifully explained, should give us all insights in terms of why do things don't work. And a lot of it, I feel, is for us to reflect upon and discover, and also solutioning. Some of them requires quite a lot of work. Nothing comes very quickly in the world of instant gratification. This one definitely you can't get instantly. So that's for all of us to really reflect upon. I think it's been an incredible and an insightful conversation for all of us who are listening into this, and will continue to consume this, even in the future. But I want to kind of slowly also reflect on a population of people who are aspiring public policy students. There are a lot of schools that are available. There are a lot of training schools that are deeply engaged in policy training. But often I get, even today, a lot of questions from students on how could they pursue career in public policy. Unfortunately, we live in a country where only director level and above positions are publicized for public policy roles. So it may not be really fair to say that only those are the roles that are available in public policy. I'm sure there are a lot of roles that are available. So for them, what would your advice be on how can they build their career in public policy? And I do see that there are a few questions that have come in from the audience as well, which we'll take up once we are done with this.
Yeah. So building up a career in public policy requires a lot of reading, a lot of reading of notifications, policy. So if you really want to build a career, then it's not enough to consume content from the media or just a few sources of media. You should chew on policy for breakfast. That's a term I like to use. You should chew on policy for breakfast. And you might be interested only in some sectors. And usually that's the case for youngsters. But you should see what's happening across sectors. Become familiar with the grammar and language of policy. So, of course, I find a lot of young professionals today who do this very well in their chosen sector. But the key is to keep track across sectors, because what's happening elsewhere today may happen in our sector tomorrow. So, good to keep track. The next one is actually an extension of the first. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to say read history. And when I say read history, I don't exactly mean the Roman Empire or the French Revolution, I mean the history of policy development at a global level over the last decade. For instance, let's take gig work. So it's gig work different. It's good to know what rules have been implemented with regard to gig work in various countries across the world. And the same could apply to competition law. It could apply to trade policy. It could apply to device security or cyber security. So good references and good examples are often the key to good advocacy, which could initially come from writing at various platforms, speaking at various platforms, getting noticed. And once you get noticed, you start working for maybe an MP or some other leaders, or you work for some you get an internship somewhere, and that way you start building your career. And finally, coming back to one of your earlier questions, I guess something I mentioned there as well, if I may take a minute. You mentioned unlearning, right? So I think young professionals, and I say this again in all humility and in all consciousness, but I want to make this point. I think young professionals who really wish to make successful and rewarding careers in public policy and advocacy, and I use the word rewarding. If you really want to make successful and rewarding careers in public policy and advocacy, we need to unlearn. Sometimes we need to unlearn a lot on day zero, because people who are naturally gravitating, young people who are naturally gravitating towards public policy, might have some experience of activism and may feel strongly about issues to begin with. So the day zero lesson, if you really want to build, I'm reiterating it, if you really want to build a successful and rewarding career, the day zero lesson is sometimes you'll have to take off our activist lenses in our professional life. And the reason I emphasize, I've seen examples in real life where, every notification is first examined from that lens. So, the solutions will emerge faster if we take off that high level lens and examine the specifics and concerns of stakeholders, the nuts and bolts approach, the approach of getting into the weeds, trying to hammer out a solution in the wording, in the language that works for all. I think that is the approach that will drive better outcomes and better rewards. So we may have our own views on policy. We all have our own views. But if policy and advocacy is to be a rewarding career choice, we keep those personal views and biases at home, and we look for solutions within established frameworks. That will be rewarding.
Great. I'm sure there are more questions that you may have. Feel free to reach out to Sharat or me when through LinkedIn, and we'll be more than happy to share our thoughts. But yeah, careers in public policy are available. You just need to spot the right place, and I'm sure there are enough and more avenues for you to explore that. I'm going to take a couple of comments and questions that have come in on the chat. How can we make policy making more democratic while retaining the necessary complexities, which is not usually grasped by the common man?
Yeah, I think the internet is a great leveler here. And if you look at platforms such as MyGov, then in many cases they offer insightful, elaborations on what a policy proposes to do. The other thing is, of course, for lots of people who are interested in policy to actually read through notifications and come up with their own interpretations and run that past a group of eminent policy experts in that field, and then maybe try to do some of what we are doing, so that it is demystified for the people. And the other thing is, we can't do this at national level. You probably want to do this at local levels. If it's
Hmm.
something that concerns a few neighborhoods in a district, then take these learnings to that district and try
Yeah.
to present unfiltered, unbiased, holistic views of something. And that might help build greater understanding. I think a constructive approach is what I'm talking about. Even in the previous answer, that was the phrase I was
Yeah.
searching for. Having a
Yeah.
constructive approach to problem solving is the key to a rewarding public policy career.
Got it. Got it. The next comment is from Rishabh. You see that our policies are aligned to help India becoming a leading player in AI ecosystem, starting from chip design and fabrication to data center expansion to provide requisite computing power to build its own AI stack without outsourcing it to big tech.
So, we've actually discussed this, Gopal, a little bit earlier, so I won't elaborate too much. A one-word answer is yes. I feel optimistic. I feel that there's a lot of proactiveness in the government's approach to AI, and this is in contrast to some of the earlier occasions when there have been breakthrough technologies. So I remain very, very hopeful about this particular wave of technologies. For instance, we are a bit late in arriving on the manufacturing part of it. But we are now
Yes.
catching up on manufacturing. The conventional manufacturing. Hopefully, on AI and related technologies and in semiconductors, hopefully we'll be up there right on time.
Wonderful. And this is a comment. I guess this was on the point where we were discussing on why the policies don't see the light. Great ideas never come to light. We have unfortunately have troublemakers who are too busy taking credit or stopping others from making it happen. It seems democratic policy making won't be as effective as a top-down approach with a few people taking quick and impactful decisions. Appreciate the perspective. I think you would. Um, I think each one of us has our own experiences and reasons, which makes us believe and see the world in the way we do. And I'll leave it at that. Sharat, really appreciate you taking time. I have a ritual which I don't want to miss for this one is to quickly do a rapid fire. So, if I may, just a few questions at the end of the day. A moment that changed you forever.
Um, that's a good one. I think the time that I got to know that I would be working for the Prime Minister of India, I think that was a moment that really changed me forever. Gave
Wonderful.
me a lot of confidence.
No, incredible. I think it is. It is, in fact, one of the moments that could be a game changing one for everybody. What grounds you on a tough day?
What grounds me on a tough day is traffic.
Good.
Seriously, seriously. I think a lot of my tough days are days when I get
Yeah,
stuck in traffic, and I do go down to Delhi some evenings, and it takes me 2 hours or 2.5 hours, and I feel that I'm missing out on a lot of productive things besides exercise, and
yeah.
really grounds me.
uh, if not public policy, what would you be doing?
I would be doing communication. It's what I've
Nice.
done for 20 years. And if not public policy, I would definitely be doing communication in some capacity.
Wonderful. A habit or a ritual that keeps you sane?
Mm, Browsing X, which is my source of a lot of
Okay,
information.
wonderful. And one
Sure.
piece of advice that you would like to give to younger self.
One piece of advice that I would like to give to my younger self was to have faith in what Steve Jobs put very well, that you can connect the dots backward,
Backwards.
but you
Yeah.
should trust the universe that they will connect. So they have in my case, and maybe I didn't have enough faith earlier. I should have.
Well, we all are work in progress, as I always believe. So um, I think we will all get to where we want to be or where we are meant to be in due course. So with that, Sharat, any parting thoughts for the audience that is going to listen or are listening in right now?
Be positive, remain constructive, and try to make a difference at whatever level you can. Those are the secret sauces to great public policy at a national level.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Sharat. Really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule and join me on this podcast. I'm sure the listeners who would have listened to this would have a lot of questions answered because at the end of the day, this is a topic that is not very easy for people to comprehend, understand. And I think you made your best attempt to demystify some of the thoughts and debunk some of the myths, if I can say that. And not just for sharing your perspective, but also remind us that policy isn't paperwork. It's about people. It's about the 1.4 billion people that we have in our country. It's also about power, and it's also about quiet choices that shape lives of millions, often without them even knowing about it. So, to all the viewers listening in, thank you for joining us today. I think at the end of the day, there is a lot more to uncover on a topic like this. Unfortunately, we just had about an hour to talk through. If this is a topic that would be of interest, do share your comments, thoughts in whatever platform you're watching, listening, because the idea is to talk about everything that is going to help shape the journey to the future. It would involve policy, it would involve health, it would involve future of work, it would involve AI, and a lot more. So, thank you for tuning in today. Your time, your curiosity, your willingness to go deeper, that's what makes this space a lot more enriching experience for me. In today's conversation, if it made you think differently, do let me know. Because if we aren't doing our bit to shape the future, who else will? Uh, it becomes more evident once we become more aware about things and in what we choose to notice, speaking up, and act upon. As the season two progresses, Journey to the Future unfolds, and this episode reminds us that the future won't be handed over to us. We will have to shape it together. More voices, more truths, more stories that demand to be heard. Until next time, stay awake, stay informed, keep tuning into the Journey of Future on LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time, and see you soon.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.